On a dark, rainy night, two beautiful girls arrive at a doorstep seeking help. Their clothes were completely drenched, and innocence was clearly visible on their faces. A man named Ivan, showing humanity, lets them in. The atmosphere inside the house gradually becomes strange. Ivan is making tea for them. Then Belle and Genesis repeatedly try to get close to him. There was a strange hint hidden in their every action. She was constantly trying to provoke Ivan, but Ivan was a married man, so he tries his best to distance himself from them. Meanwhile, Genesis leaves, pretending to need to use the bathroom. Belle, seizing the opportunity, begins to seduce Evan again. Gradually, they become very close. Things escalate to the point where she begins to remove Evan's clothes. This time, Evan loses control and becomes intimate with them in the bathroom. But at that very moment, Evan had no idea he had made the biggest mistake of his life. The question still remains. What exactly had happened to Evan? And why did those two girls do this to him? To find the answers to all these questions, we will have to go back a little bit in the story. This story is about a man, an architect by profession. His name was Ivan. He lived a happy life with his wife, Karen, and two children. Karen also worked at an art gallery. Therefore, both were quite busy. The entire family had been planning a trip for quite some time. The children were very excited about the trip. But at the last minute, Ivan had some urgent work to do, forcing him to stay home. So Karen took the two children and left for a week-long trip. Meanwhile, Ivan was left alone, at home with his pet dog. Little did he know that this 1 week would change his entire life. That very night, Ivan was sitting alone at home, working. The weather outside was extremely bad, and it was raining heavily. Suddenly, Ivan opened the door to see two girls standing there. One was named Belle, the other was named Genesis. Both were completely drenched in the rain. Shivering with cold, they told Evan that they had to go to a party. But they lost their way, and their phones were also damaged due to the heavy rain. Evan was there. Seeing their condition, he lets them in. He gives them towels to dry themselves. Evan then gives them his iPad and asks them to find the correct route. After a while, Genesis reveals that they're a long way from their destination. The taxi driver actually dropped them off at the wrong location. Evan books a new cab to help them. However, the cab's arrival was still about 45 minutes away. Both girls' dresses were completely soaked. So they ask Evan for permission to dry their clothes in the dryer. Evan agrees. A short while later, Belle and Genesis emerge from the bathroom after freshening up. Evan is making tea for them. The atmosphere in the house gradually becomes awkward and uncomfortable. The three then sit in the living room and start talking. During their conversation, Belle and Genesis repeatedly try to get too close to Evan. Evan feels a little uncomfortable with their actions, so he gets up and moves to another chair. He then checks his phone and sees that the cab is still 20 minutes away. To calm things down, Evan asks them if they both. What work do they do? The people she tells about both, she is an air hostess and often travels for work. They travel to different countries. During their conversation, Belle and Genesis constantly try to attract Evan, but Evan always maintains a distance. In reality, Evan deeply loved his wife, and that's why he was trying his best to control himself. Meanwhile, the two girls seduce Evan even more, telling stories of their colorful lives and foreign trips. The atmosphere in the house has become even more awkward. Meanwhile, Evan checks his phone again and sees that the cab is only 5 minutes away. Genesis herself to go to the bathroom and leaves. Now only Belle and Evan are left in the dead of night. Belle tries to get closer to Evan again, but Evan receives a call from the cab driver. The cab has already arrived outside their house. Belle goes to the bathroom to call Genesis, while Evan goes inside to get his clothes. But several minutes pass, and neither of them emerges. Evan slowly walks towards the bathroom, taking the clothes. He knocks the door, but there's no response from inside. A slight hesitation. Evan opens the door and goes inside, but the sight inside completely shocks him. Belle and Genesis stand before him, naked. There's a strange allure in their eyes, as if they're deliberately drawing Evan in. At first, Evan tries to restrain himself, but this time, his control breaks, and the atmosphere gradually changes completely. After this, the world between the three of them ends. What started in the bathroom continues throughout the night. Time flies by unnoticed, and in no time at all, morning arrives. Ivan feels a strange sense of urgency. An eerie silence descends upon the room. He looks around in panic because Bill and Genesis have suddenly disappeared. Evan initially thinks Bill and Genesis have quietly left after the night, but suddenly he hears the sound of girls laughing inside the house. This sound is coming from the kitchen. Evan immediately rushes there, but the sight inside leaves him stunned. The entire kitchen is in disarray. Food, utensils, and other items are scattered everywhere, as if a storm has struck. Seeing all this, Evan's anger grows. He tells them clearly that enough is enough and that he's going to drop them off at their homes. But then he receives a video call from his wife. Evan immediately tries to act normal and goes outside to talk. He was acting as if everything was fine on the phone, but the panic on his face clearly indicated that the situation inside had spiraled out of control. The call ends. Evan returns inside, and this time angrily orders them to get dressed and leave the house immediately. But Belle and Genesis refuse to leave. Instead, they start defacing the art and paintings Evan's wife created. Evan is completely enraged. He angrily threatens to call the police and send them to jail. But then Belle comes very close to him and says something that shakes Evan's nerves. She says that they are both still underage and Evan has already been intimate with them. If the police come, it won't be the two girls who will be jailed, but Evan. For the first time, Ivan realized he was in deep trouble. Just then, there was a knock on the door. A friend of Ivan's wife was standing there. Evan panics, telling Belle and Genesis not to come out, and then quickly goes to open the door. But just as he starts talking to his wife's friend, Genesis suddenly sneaks up behind him and clings to Evan in front of everyone. Seeing this, his wife's friend is completely enraged. She curses Evan profusely and leaves in anger. After this incident, Ivan's anger erupts completely. He goes inside and yells at Belle and Genesis, saying the situation is out of his control, so he actually calls the police. Belle and Genesis' faces flash with fear for the first time upon hearing the police. They agree to leave. Evan wastes no time in picking them up in his car, drops them off outside a house in the city, and returns. But his troubles aren't over when he returns home. The entire house is in disarray. The walls, the furnishings, and the kitchen are all a mess. It seems as if the two girls have disrupted not just his home, but Evan's entire life. Evan stays up late cleaning the house. Then, exhausted, he settles down to his work. But then suddenly, from inside the house, there was a loud sound of breaking glass. A voice echoes. Ivan, frightened, runs toward the sound. Upon reaching the spot, he sees his family photo lying broken on the ground. The look on his face clearly reveals his unease, as if someone has deliberately targeted his most precious possession. He slowly bends down and picks it up, but then someone attacks him from behind. Evan falls unconscious. A moment later, when he regains consciousness, he's utterly stunned. He finds himself tied to a bed with ropes. Terrified, Evan screams loudly and begs Genesis to untie him. But then Belle enters the room, this time wearing Evan's daughter's school uniform. Fear and disgust are evident on Evan's face. Belle and Genesis then slowly approach her, attempting to undress her. The atmosphere in the room has become even more frightening and dangerous. But then, Evan suddenly receives a video call from his wife. As the phone rings, Genesis smiles and looks at Evan, and Belle gets intimate with her. She tries to force herself to be. But when Evan refuses, Genesis plays another dangerous trick. She picks up her phone and threatens to tell his wife everything on video call if he doesn't comply. Evan is now completely trapped. Fear, shame, and helplessness are evident on his face. Finally, forced, he agrees to be intimate with Belle. Belle then climbs on top of him and deliberately provokes him. She makes loud noises, as if she's thoroughly enjoying this game. Meanwhile, Genesis is recording everything on her phone. Evan now understands that these two aren't just playing a game with him, but are intent on slowly ruining his entire life. Meanwhile, Genesis goes to the kitchen to get something to eat. This is where Evan finds his chance. Pretending to be intimate with Belle, he tries to untie the ropes with all his might. As soon as his hands are released, he suddenly pushes Belle hard, knocking her straight off the bed. Evan then runs towards Genesis in a rage. Now wants to end this horrific game at any cost. But before he can do anything, Genesis attacks him again. Evan is stunned by the sudden attack. He faints a second time. After this, the two girls tie him up again, and now their true madness begins to unfold. They both start acting strange and psychotic in front of him. Sometimes they scream, and sometimes they try to scare him. Then they put headphones in both of Evan's ears and start mentally torturing him by playing music at extremely high volume. Evan lay completely helpless. His life now seemed like a nightmare. But then the doorbell rang outside the house. Lewis was standing at the door. He was Evan's wife Karen's assistant. But as soon as Lewis entered the house, he couldn't see Evan anywhere because Belle and Genesis had already locked him in a room. The two girls innocently lied to Lewis, saying they were Evan's nieces. At first, everything seemed normal, but the strange atmosphere of the house was making Lewis feel a little uneasy. Suddenly, he heard a faint sound coming from a room inside the house. Lewis immediately started moving towards it. But at that moment, Belle and Genesis secretly take his inhaler from his pocket. Lewis was completely unaware of this. He then opens the door to the room and upon seeing the scene inside, is astonished. He was completely terrified. Ivan lay bound with ropes. His face showed fear and exhaustion. Lewis immediately rushes to help her and begins untying the ropes. But then, there's the sound of things breaking outside. The two girls are destroying Karen's expensive art and paintings. Seeing this, Lewis goes over to stop them. But Evan shouts at him, "They're extremely dangerous. Don't go near them." But Lewis doesn't take his words seriously. He goes outside and tries to stop Bill and Genesis. They seem to be in a frenzy. They continue breaking things and flatly refuse to listen to Loy. Meanwhile, Loy's breathing suddenly becomes rapid. Her health deteriorates as she suffers from asthma. In a panic, he immediately reaches into his pocket to retrieve his inhaler. But the next moment, his face turns pale because the inhaler wasn't in his pocket, and only Belle and Genesis knew she had already stolen it. Now, Belle and Genesis's truly dangerous game has begun. The two girls start playing by throwing Lewis's inhaler at each other, and poor Lewis, he gasped, trying to retrieve his inhaler. His breathing was steadily worsening. The fear on his face was palpable. But the two men showed no mercy. Instead, they were laughing at her plight. In the chaos, Lewis suddenly slips and hits his head hard on a nearby rock. Everything ends in an instant. Lewis lies there, writhing in agony, completely still, as if dead. But the most terrifying thing is that Belle and Genesis burst out laughing, as if a human death is just a joke to them. Evan now fully understands that these two are not normal girls, but complete psychos. Together, they cover Loy's body with paper and paint it, making it look like a strange statue so that no one will suspect them. They were cleverly preparing to dispose of her body. But their plot doesn't end there. They send messages from Evan's phone to Loy's phone, leading people to believe that Loy and Karen were having an affair, and this leads Evan to murder Loy in a fit of rage. This meant they were slowly planning to put the entire blame on Ivan. Meanwhile, Evan secretly tries to reach his iPad with his feet, hoping to send a message to his wife for help. But his luck runs out. Bill and Genesis catch him doing so, and the next moment, they pick up the iPad and throw it outside. The iPad shatters completely upon hitting the ground. The two girls then begin wreaking havoc inside the house, smashing everything, furniture, paintings, and mirrors, into ruins. They then begin digging a large hole in the garden. Fear grips Evan's body. He realizes he might be next. He begins screaming for help. But then, the two girls point a gun at him. Evan's voice stops at the sight of the gun. Fear remains in his eyes, and he finally gives up. The next morning, the story reaches its most terrifying point. Bill and Genesis drag Evan into the garden, tying him with a rope, and then throw him into a hole they had dug overnight. They slowly bury his entire body with soil, leaving only his head outside so he can watch his destruction while still alive. Evan he was devastated. The fear was clearly visible in his eyes. Then Belle and Genesis sat down in front of him and began revealing the truth about themselves. They said they were both psychos, and that ruining people was just a game for them. There was no remorse on her face. Instead, she seemed to be enjoying it all. She told Evan that she had preyed on several married men before. And this time, Evan was her next victim. This meant that everything that had happened from the beginning until now was all part of a plan. Genesis then takes out Evan's phone and shows him a video of Belle wearing Evan's daughter's school uniform and getting intimate with her. But the real shock was yet to come. She captions the video "Happy Father's Day," meaning that anyone watching the video would feel as if Evan was indulging in indecent acts with his own daughter. Fear and helplessness are evident in Evan's eyes, as his life is about to end. His identity is about to be ruined forever. Belle and Genesis then leave the phone behind and leave. Now buried in the mud, Evan struggles to pull his hand out. After a lot of effort, he reaches his phone. He wants to quickly delete the video, but in his panic and weakness, he makes a mistake. Instead of deleting the video, it gets liked, and this small mistake could have been the biggest disaster of his life. A short while later, we see Karen return home with her children, but upon entering, she is shocked. The entire house is in disarray, with belongings strewn everywhere. But Karen had no idea the true truth. She believes that Evan must have partied with his friends after she left, and that he's responsible for the house's condition. The story ends on this terrifying and unsettling note. The question now remains, will Evan ever be able to prove his innocence, or will this dangerous game played by those two psycho girls ruin his life? This story teaches us that sometimes a person's greatest undoing isn't triggered by an enemy, but by a moment of weakness. If the story captivated you until the end, be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more such dark and shocking movies.